within the first 7 seconds of somebody walking into the room and sitting down, you will have made a huge number of assumptions, and that's just an evolutionary thing.
When you're doing the act of hiring, you're really trying to understand that human being in front of you, and they could have spikes of strength here and sort of troughs of weakness here, but up until recently, the technology was actually not sophisticated enough to really help me feel like it can help me make a better decision about the person in front of me.
Recruitment is clearly a human-centric process and really important. The point of technology then is, how do we help the human make a better decision?
If I was meeting you for the first time and I held up 3 different types of questions for you, you could probably just bucket it, in your own sort of sensible way. And that's sort of the same with these LLMs. So it just reduces the amount of time it takes for you to coax a really sensible, accurate answer out of an algorithm. If I'm a director at a company, I may have a really trusted, right-hand person who I trust to make certain decisions, but actually I'm still accountable for that decision. And, I may have entrusted them to make it, but I'm going to be held accountable for the outcome of that decision. And that's very analogous to how we should think about using AI tools.
How do you keep that balance between the human side of what we want to bring out and see with the benefits of automation?
What you're not trying to do as a TA leader is become an expert in AI. But the thing that you're an expert on is, what are the things I need to achieve? What are the things my team needs to achieve? What are the things that are keeping my team up at night? What are the things that are slowing my team down? And it's only by having an understanding of what these tools can do for you that you can start to marry those two things, because now I think it can really substantially be impacted by AI.
Welcome to the latest episode of the TA Disruptors Gen AI podcast. I'm Robert Newry, CEO and co-founder of Arctic Shores, and delighted to be welcoming to this episode a fellow CEO and co-founder, Siadhal Magos of Metaview.ai. Rather than making a hash of the brilliant things that you do, I know, around supporting people doing better interviewing, why don't you give us a little introduction about your company?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on, Robert. Pumped to be here. So Metaview is an AI assistant built specifically for the key conversations that recruiters have. Interviews, you mentioned, is a really important conversation that recruiters lead and are part of, but also intake meetings, debriefs. What we believe and we know is there's a ton of really valuable information within those conversations. Recruiters spend far too much of their time transcribing or taking notes on that information and then trying to sort of shuffle that information into various systems. And so we automate that all for them. You can think of us like a AI-powered note taker on steroids, built specifically for recruiters. They tend to love it for saving them time and just enabling them to actually engage with candidates and in hiring managers much more effectively, truly be curious rather than be a scribe. So yeah, that's what we do, all about helping recruiters be more productive in those conversations.
Sure, no, and I love it. The whole concept of a scribe on steroids for making interviews a lot better. And I think the interesting thing that you set out to solve is something that we've all experienced at some point, which is, we're all having to interview, particularly if you're in a high growth or even if you're just in a normal business because of attrition, and then you get to that interview stage and you have to then sort of find a way of, how do I record it? How do I make it consistent? How do I go back and audit it? So it's something that we all have experienced and had pain with. But I'd love, what led you to this? Because you started at Uber as a head of product, and I always think it's interesting when somebody starts up a business and has a product perspective too. So tell us a little bit about how you started this all off.
Yeah, so I was on the product team at Uber. It was definitely a sort of big part of my work there. But this was 2016, 2017, when Uber was already a sort of relatively large company, but still was growing incredibly fast. So in the sort of the 24 months that I was there, we went from 7,000 to 15,000 people. Wow. And so really anyone anywhere in the company was spending a ton of time on hiring. And that was my first exposure in my career to sort of that being like a real sizable 25 to 30% of the time I spent was on hiring. So doing that, you get exposed to a bunch of the pains, inefficiencies, and toil associated with hiring. Maybe not as exposed as the the recruiters that we work with and now sort of like, call our customers. But still, like, you got to see this doesn't feel like the most high leverage way and most effective way to go about building a world-class team. And that was the starting point for us. Again, from a hiring manager view, where I was just very aware that it was these interviews that were determining who we ended up hiring and how quickly, as far as I was concerned as the hiring manager. So that was the starting point for that.
Brilliant. No, and I think that gives you a great foundation for being able to build something. Was Uber, one of the sort of great sort of tech pioneers, were they already using AI at that point? Did you when you were thinking about how you were going to solve this problem, was AI already something that you were experimenting with, or was it still a bit early days and you've got to sort of jump on that afterwards?
No, so they weren't using AI in the sort of the assessment portion of the hiring. I don't know about sort of much higher in the funnel. For certain roles, I can imagine they may have, but not nothing I was exposed to. Hiring was treated as incredibly serious. It was as a leader of a team, you know part of your job was to build the team too. It wasn't like just recruiting's job to do that. You were partnered with the recruiter you partnered with, and it was your shared responsibility. But it was still quite analog. How do you train interviewers? Well, you'd get them to listen to you interview a few times, and then you'd listen to them a few times, and then you'd say, yeah, okay, you seem fine, you can go and do it. And when it got to debriefs, you would review people's notes, and some of them would be scrappy. I don't want to let that mean that I'm not going to hire this person just because someone else didn't take good notes, so we're going to go for it anyway. Like all of the same sort of rough edges that you'd expect in any other company, we saw there. And the thing that really came into sharp contrast for me was that wasn't the case in the rest of my work at Uber. I really felt like as a product manager, I had superpowers. I had incredible access to data, incredible experimentation tooling. I could deploy a feature to N% of users in Wisconsin, and then in another click of a button deploy it in sort of some corner of India or something like that, and get the test results back almost automatically. So I had these superpowers as a PM, but as a hiring manager, I was sort of doing it maybe with a bit more rigor than I'd done before, but still sort of doing it the way that I'd done it before. Uber did they did build their own recruiting technology, so they built their own ATS, for example, but it was more because they found that the existing tools couldn't operate at the speed and scale and with the structure that they wanted. It wasn't it wasn't because they were looking to apply AI to it or anything like that.
Yes, I think that's one of the sort of interesting, even the greatest and best technology companies out there, where you can deploy stuff at a click of a button. Talent acquisition tends to be almost in a sort of different world that hasn't been brought along or given the same attention or exposed to technology. What do you think is the reason for that there are so many parts of talent acquisition where technology is now being suddenly accelerated in there, but it's not been a natural starting point for the adoption of technology?
I think there's some market dynamic aspects to this. Hiring it's not like there's not necessarily always a buyer and a seller, right? It's a matchmaking act where you're both partially buying, both partially selling, and that obviously creates a dynamic within that interaction where no one necessarily has the right to impose a certain tool set within that interaction. Now, obviously, that's not totally, because obviously a lot of companies have toolings that they use, but there's still this thing that, hey, you know what? Maybe if this person doesn't want to do X or Y thing, they could still be a great fit, and we should try and get them to join us.
Yes.
And they have a bit of power, they have a bit of agency there. So I think that's one thing. But I think by far the most important thing is that it's incredibly. When I think about deploying, when I have my product manager hat on, and I think about deploying a feature, as much as we empathize with our users as much as possible and whatnot. At some point, they appear as numbers in a spreadsheet, and we see how many of those users did we have. Whereas when you're doing the act of hiring, you're really trying to understand that human being in front of you, and they could have spikes of strength here and sort of troughs of weakness here, but that's okay as long as they have these other two strengths. And so the amount of nuance that's involved in understanding is this person going to help my team get where it needs to go is there's just a lot of variables to it. And I think no up until recently, the technology was actually not sophisticated enough to really help me feel like it can help me make a better decision about the person in front of me. And so we relied a lot on our instincts.
Yes.
And much as we try and sort of structure interview process and whatnot, you would still rely on that instinct. And taking the conversation the way you want it to go in order to understand this person.
Yeah, really interesting. And I love your point about that the whole thing about recruitment is clearly a human-centric process and really important.
Yeah.
And that the point of technology then is how do we help the human make a better decision? And it shouldn't be replacing the human decision making. It'd be how do we make a better decision?
Yeah.
And how do you think AI now starts to play in that? And specifically, where do you think we are today versus where we were when you started a few years ago with AI? Because it feels different, the AI that we have today and the way that's going to help them make better decisions than it did a few years ago.
Yeah. Maybe I'll take the second part of that question first, because I think there's maybe more meat to the second part, and we can dive into it. So I think what's changed for us specifically, so Metaview's been going for 4.5, 5 years or so, always focused on how can we enable the people involved in hiring run better conversations and make better decisions off the back of them. That's like broad base. That's what we do. Where we were before these sort of foundational LLMs came along and just created like revolutionary capability for us that we could then sort of harness and use with our customers. Where we were before was we were much more focused on almost working out, could we predict things like, and we were identifying one thing at a time that, hey, could we build AI that can identify what questions from a full conversation are the assessment questions? Right. And then we can help our customers understand, do they have some interviewers who are much more rigorous than another set of interviewers, and do those interviewers tend to be more rigorous when they're talking with a certain type of candidate or at a certain stage, or candidates from a certain background? So still really valuable things, and obviously we built a whole company around trying to help companies understand this thing. But the big thing that changed was the amount of work that we were putting in to build up the data, what we think of as our data asset, the data that we annotated from these conversations to build a model to understand what was the difference between an assessment question and a conversational question, like, hey, how are you, versus, tell me about a time you did X or Y. Suddenly you can actually do that quite easily by calling one of these foundational models. And so while initially that for us was like, oh, damn, like a lot of the stuff we've been working on now you can sort of do it via an API call. Mm-hmm. What it really opened up was it really just dragged our roadmap like 5 years forward. Like suddenly we're now at a point where all of the things that we knew we'd love to accelerate as part of the hiring process, or we'd love to be able to detect within the hiring process so that the recruiting team and the hiring manager are more informed, like 90% of them we can do. Like as long as we build the product correctly, we can actually execute those things. So for us, it was just a massive acceleration of all the things that we always wanted to do, and it changed our mode of operation from, one at a time, let's bite off certain things that we can help people understand from within the interview process, to almost the opposite.
Yes.
This Cambrian explosion of things we can do. How do we make sure we pick the right ones so that we're actually really accelerating and enabling our customers to do a better job? So I think that's when I think about the change. It's you go for AI companies I don't want to sort of talk in too broad strokes. Obviously, lots of other people took different approaches, but these foundational LLMs becoming so impactful, we were one at a time, work out what we can work out. Mm-hmm. Now it's not AGI, it's not general intelligence, but it's very generalizable.
Yes.
And it does a really good job at a high number of things. Yes. And that's just changed roadmaps for a product like ours.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really interesting things when we've both been around the block for a bit on this and seen AI when it initially came out, and a lot of it was around point automation and very specific things, and you had to steer and guide, and you got a degree of productivity from it. Whereas this time round, it feels, with the way that these LLM models work, that is generalizable, and I think that's a really interesting point, because it just means that you can introduce it and provide that productivity broader to the user without having to think it through all the way.
And to put it in really sort of tangible terms, I guess, the way that we used to think about this was we'd have to build up, in the order of magnitude of 25 to 50,000 data points of our own, proprietary data points that we would gather by building a product that customers loved, so they'd start to use it, and we could generate data off the back of the conversations they were having on our platform, which enabled us to make the product better because we can make certain predictions for them. Now you're at a point where, because these LLMs are so good at reasoning, just as I could, if I was meeting you for the first time and I held up a 3 different types of questions for you. You could probably just bucket it, in your own sort of sensible way, because of all of your lived experience to this point that has made you able to do that reasoning. And that's sort of the same with these LLMs. So it just reduces the amount of time it takes for you to train, for you to coax a really sensible, accurate answer out of an algorithm, basically.
Yes. So from a TA practitioner's point of view, incredibly exciting, because the productivity that they're going to see is just going to be accelerated now. As you were saying, there's lots of things that you'll be able to bring to them, pushing roadmaps forward 5 years. That's not just true of you, it's true of all the tech stacks that are out there. And that's where a lot of the media frenzy has been around so far, around Gen AI. But there are also some questions that we should be asking ourselves. You see quite a lot of discussion in the news around, should we hold back the development of AI because it's moving very fast? Do we understand all the things that are going on in the models here?
Yep.
There's the worry about a black box. And I suppose TA leaders and practitioners are sort of sitting there saying, okay, great, on the one hand there's a lot of productivity coming, but actually I hear a lot of worry and clouds on the horizon on this.
Yeah.
And how have you addressed then that? Do you worry about anything in the use of Gen AI as you're building it into your product, and what that might mean then for interviewing and assessment?
Yeah, we of course think about it a bunch. The way that we look at so I think there's like one almost philosophical point that the world has to wrap their head around, and far be it from me to set the agenda on this, but I guess the way I look at it is, what we're not moving is to a world where we're removing humans' accountability for their actions and decisions. So what tool set you use to arrive at that decision is going to be up to you. And that happens already. If I'm a director at a company, I may have a really trusted, right-hand person who I trust to make certain decisions, but actually I'm still accountable for that decision. And, I may have entrusted them to make it, but I'm going to be held accountable for the outcome of that decision. And that's very analogous to how we should think about using AI tools, if you're even using it in a decision-making process, which is, I think, the big thing that maybe confuses people in this. There's the sort of a lot of the discourse around adopting AI is a little bit all or nothing. It's like, but that's not actually the case. Making decisions is almost like the last point in the evolution of this technology. Where we spend more time is automation, the sort of the pool of things that are really quite robotic tasks anyway, have always been quite robotic tasks that can now be automated. That pool has just gotten a lot bigger. Yeah. So, we don't want to be looking that gift horse in the mouth and sort of, continue to toil away doing really low leverage, undifferentiated, uncreative things. There's now a bunch of things that AI can do for us. That's essentially, I guess, the main area where we play is what elements of toil and drudgery can we take away from recruiters so they can spend more time on the human things. So automation is obviously one big bucket that I think is less controversial.
Yes.
The second one is detection. A lot of folks in TA will have complained for a long time about their ability to get meaningful data out of for example, their ATS or their CRM, which is essentially how to actually find the insights that matter from these tools. And one of the reasons is because their actual sort of what they're trained in is not being able to query this quite complex data.
Yes.
And the other thing is maybe that the tools just weren't built in such a way to be able to harness this data in an effective way. And the third and most important one was a lot of the tools didn't actually house the most important data, because there was no way, if you think about what an ATS is, it's really, of course, people you've spoken to when and these sort of things. And then it's whatever some of your people have managed to write down about those people, which is just not a lot of information, not a lot of valuable information. So that detection bucket has changed massively as well, because now we can actually almost suck up every piece of ambient data that we all create as we go about our work. Whether we're sort of, rather than having to enter it into systems, it can all just be gathered up, and then we can use natural language to ask an AI to find information and trends and insights from within that data, which just massively opens the aperture for the number of people who can get their questions answered. Because the amount of friction between me having a thought that I'd like to know the answer to this question, to raising that with the business intelligence team, to them saying, well, therefore we need to sort of get access to this API from this product into our Tableau or Looker or something. That has all gone away. I can just ask the question in natural language. So I think those are really big for us. We focus more on the automation and the detection. We focus much less on the decisions. I think it's really correct for there to be this fear, essentially, around, well, how much do we allow AI to make decisions for us? And I think there should be a lot of diligence and a lot of sort of soul searching to understand how much we're willing to do that. But that shouldn't get in the way of understanding that there's some immediate benefits we can have in these other two much less controversial parts of our work.
Yeah, really interesting. So, you can look at, I suppose, into the impact of Gen AI into kind of two buckets here. One is that you're just going to get some things just automated, non-controversial, they're writing or capturing scripts, giving you information, you'll be able to query that information better. There is, I suppose, an element then of training, but actually the whole thing about ChatGPT is just the simplicity of the interface now and able to do those queries. But ultimately, if you're in talent acquisition, there is a decision that has to be made.
Yeah.
And so I get the productivity bit, and they'll be able to do more of the things which they enjoy doing. One is making the right decision, and the other is managing the candidate and the candidate experience. But the whole point, though, about having that data and the access data is that it should enable you to make a better decision. And I wonder if is that something that you are deliberately keeping away from, because actually you're thinking, you know what, that whole use of AI in there, that's scary. I don't know, how to answer some of these questions of how much of the data, for example, that you capture in your interview notes, how much could you then start scoring that, and then the interviewer is then able to use that information to remove some of the human bias, because that's the big thing for me that I worry about in any interview. And from a psychology point of view, we know that within the first 7 seconds of somebody walking into the room and sitting down, you will have made a huge number of assumptions, and that's just an evolutionary thing that we're sort of checking in there. Do you fit within our context, community, way that we see the world?
Yeah. And
so you're capturing lots of data on all of that. You've got this human bias that's going on, and are you? So I'm just interested. I just want to test you a bit on this. Would you want to? Why would you not want to take the data that you've got and help make that human decision so much better? Is that a natural evolution of where you could go, or it's beyond you? I don't want to answer that ethical question of how do I help a human make a better decision with data that's quite black box?
So what we believe, and this is obviously really supported by our customers, also our own experience, is that a lot of the things that stop you from making a great decision are the time you have to deliberate and understand that decision, and the information you have access to given the amount of time you have left. So sort of another way to think about bias, and again, you'll be sort of incredibly familiar with this, is a lot of the time they're shortcuts. They're like, well, I have to make this 7-second judgment because when I used to be in somewhere else, I had to decide whether to run or fight or something like that in that time.
Yes.
And those are all shortcuts, and I relied on those shortcuts, and hopefully those shortcuts were right. More often they were wrong, or at least were safe. Even if there was a few false positives in there, at least I was safe.
Yes.
In a world where, so when we think about bias within our tool set, it's more by way of how can we free people from the things that currently make them incredibly information and time poor, such that they fall back to these biases. So we did not start Metaview to solve that particular bias within hiring. We started Metaview to solve the inefficiencies and the toil and what felt like wasted energy that made people less motivated to really engage in a thoughtful hiring process. That's why we started the company. And I think there's this knock-on consequence around bias. So we see ourselves much more as a tool for the people involved in the hiring process. if someone decided to use, and we think the sort of the net positive value, the net positive sort of impact of that is that most people don't want to take these shortcuts. Most people, when they're exposed to more, if they're exposed to more information or are able to be more open-minded and curious during a conversation because they're not so focused on just writing down what they're hearing, that has a positive impact. I can't sort of, point to the exact piece of data that proves that's the case, but that's the feedback we get, and just sort of that's what we find. We're saving people time. They use it for good things to be more productive, more impactful. Now, if over time people are really intent on using their ability to query everything they've learned from an interview in order to substantiate a biased point of view that they sort of consciously have, then that's sort of a different. We're not addressing that problem right now. I can imagine that being an emergent problem at some point in the future, but it's not really something we hear is happening a lot or something we're specifically focused on. We're for the recruiter, we're for the interviewer. We want to help them achieve what they're trying to achieve quicker and to a higher quality using the latest technology. That's sort of our bucket for now.
Yeah, no, I get that. And let's just go back to that point about higher quality, because I think you've always got those twin drivers within the recruitment process. We want it to be as efficient as possible, but we want to get the best candidates.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize that actually there's a compromise in you want the highest quality, you have to spend the most amount of time and effort on that. If you want the lowest cost, it's the least. And so that's where, technology such as yours starts to play into that. But the quality point, you could easily use ChatGPT to instantly generate questions for interviewers based on a job description. Yep. So one of the challenges is not just recording and transcribing it, but if you look at from the quality angle on that is, well, am I asking the right questions? Am I considering the answers to those questions in a way that is consistent and fair?
Yep.
So if you don't tackle that, how do they solve that quality piece? Or do you still think that that's a problem and is it a problem that AI can solve, or actually there's still things that you feel Gen AI needs to be clearer about before you throw it into solving that problem?
We don't solve that problem like creation of, hey, this is what you should be asking this person given whatever context we can gather. We know there's a ton of process that a lot of organizations have to work out their question scripts and their competencies and their rubrics for these roles. We don't play there yet. But I definitely think that what we do believe in is there should be a feedback loop to those rubrics or those question scripts, right? Okay, are those questions actually being asked in the interviews? No one really knows. You only know if they are or not if someone fills in the box. That's sort of, but you don't know what really happened. Secondly, are we actually eliciting the signal we want reliably using that question? Again, no one knows. You can go months, years having the same question again and again to all these candidates and realize, well, we're not actually getting anything out of this question. So that feedback loop we do care a lot about. Now, at some point, of course, we'll also want to maybe more directly and explicitly help them with these design of the interview. And I think LLMs are going to be, a foundational part of enabling that in a nuanced way, without needing a massive team of consultants to go out there and help them do it. But right now, it's more our customers will be using us as a way to look into the interview, inform their own judgment, then make the judgment that they will make the judgment to say, we're going to change the question to this. And they may do a ton of research. They may use ChatGPT in the way you described to help them do that. Yes. We don't really know. That's not our business to know about that right now almost. But what we do give them is that insight into, well, how are these things actually going down
sure.
when you ask them.
And just on that point, do you see a worry or a vulnerability or a threat if we look at it from the candidate point of view? So quite a lot of the things that I've seen on LinkedIn discussions, Reddit discussions are, if you want to prepare for your interview, go into ChatGPT and put in the LinkedIn profile of the person that's going to be interviewing you, put in the job description, and if you were that person, what were the type of interview questions, and perhaps pull something from the career site that gives some information about the values. What are the type of questions that you would ask? and what would be the optimal answer. So do you worry at all, or should TA leaders be worrying that you have all this wonderful automation, but actually increasingly people are going to be turning up at interview perfectly scripted, and then you can have the most efficient process in the world, but if they're perfectly scripted, or even falsely scripted in the sense that you don't really see the true person. Are you worried about that at all? Do you think that's a threat that they need to be thinking about?
So there are lots of like almost fun ways to take that, but I think the end answer for me personally is no, not concerned about that. And the reason we're not concerned about that is because even in that situation where sort of 99% of everything is predicted and scripted or whatnot, the only thing that's going to be that's going to differentiate that candidate from the next candidate who comes along who does the same thing is the candidate. So the alpha is still the human being, the candidate in this case. And that's the same from a hiring perspective. If my reaction to when I'm hearing these answers is to sort of doggedly stick to the script I had and just come away with no insights, then I'm not going to get any alpha as a hiring manager or a recruiter either. Whereas a great, thoughtful recruiter will get that alpha, and it might only be that 1 or 2% that is different or something, but that's going to be where the competition is. That's the alpha. So I don't think what you're describing is going to become that common, and I think increasingly we'll obviously change the way we assess people to the point where we're asking questions where there is no sort of categorically correct answer to this. It's like we're trying to understand if you're a right fit for this company, this role. So I think that's like a basic way to sort of avoid some of the things that you described. But in a way, it sort of doesn't matter. The reality is the human is going to be the alpha. We are still going to be working out if this human can come into our organization and help us achieve our goals. And the only bit that's going to be different from one human to another is the part that's human. So
yes, which I think is absolutely right. What it does raise the point, though, that the focus of the interview, in fact, the whole of the recruitment process, really needs to bring that out. Is how do you bring out that alpha? How do you bring the human bit out? And up to now, a lot of that has been really around, which my big thing is about scrap the CV, because that doesn't really, past experience doesn't necessarily predict future performance on this. What you want to know is what does the person bring to the role, what's unique about them, what's their motivation, what's perhaps their separate skills that they've learned in a different space bring to it. And ultimately that is what the interview and the process should be about, is how do we bring the human element out. And I suppose my question a bit to you is, back to sort of the start of the conversation a bit around this, is how can, I suppose, is your perspective is TA should embrace technology because they can still be human about it, but what are the things as they get more and more technology companies coming in saying, I can answer this for you, how do you keep that balance between the human side of what we want to bring out and see with the benefits of automation, which can actually be quite attractive as a way of actually not having to spend all the time talking to people and that sort of thing?
I think that there's no great answer to your question. How do we do it? The reality is, as with anything that is disruptive, some people will harness that change, adapt to where the cheese has moved to, and work out how they operate in that environment. And everyone's, again, even within that, there'll be a spectrum. People will operate differently. So I don't think there's like any like how to. I would say the only sort of thing that is really obvious to me is any operator, and obviously we're focusing TA, recruiters and whatnot, they need to build up their intuition around how they could be leveraging this technology, and then apply their judgment to what are the things that I actually still really want to focus on myself, because I think I can provide alpha, I can be differentiated in how I personally go about doing this, could be augmented by AI, but I still want to be sort of like doing the thing. And what are the parts that actually I now think are not something that are going to be done by humans in the future, and whether I like that or not, there's no point in me spending a bunch of my time doing that anymore. That's I guess like a how-to for me is, increase your intuition around that. I think using something like ChatGPT is a great starting point, and understanding where it's, because obviously the answers, you asked earlier actually, what are some of the sort of dangers we see? I'd say one that I would add to that is taking an AI generated answer as a good answer, sight unseen, like almost before it's even finished, typing it out, and before reviewing it. That's definitely a danger, because it's not always the case. It's not always a good output, especially if you haven't provided the right context. So you need to use these tools to build up that intuition, and just as that's true within ChatGPT, it's also true within other AI tools as well. It's true within Metaview that you need to sort of build up, hey, where does this actually, completely help me? Where are ways where I shouldn't be relying on this in this particular type of a case? Because these are what is already for sure is the people who are leveraging these tools are getting through more work more quickly to a higher quality than the people who aren't. And that's just going to increase over time.
So your tips, and I think that's quite good just to think about as we wrap up things a bit here, is for TA leaders and concerned and practitioners concerned about AI and what it means for them and for their organizations, is first to just be general users. So everybody should be using, I found some interesting things. I've used ChatGPT to help write my Mother's Day card, because she liked a ditty, and so I wanted to write an Irish ditty for her. Then some people I hear have used it to write shopping lists or whatever. So it would I suppose one bit is use it, and just in general get familiar about what it produces, and some of the things about how you put your own intuition on there. Any other things, I suppose, is there another sort of any other tips you've got for safe usage? How should they, two questions really, how should they experiment with something with AI? And secondly, what are the questions they should be asking any AI vendor that comes to them before they start introducing it into their organization?
So how I think the first part of the question was how can they experiment?
Yes, just experiment.
Obviously there's products out there that you can experiment with, and most will be set up in such a way that, because this is all very novel, you can actually have a play in some way. Obviously, what a great TA leader needs to do is some type of filtering. What you don't want to say is, hey, free for all, just go and try everything and we'll just see what sticks. That's going to be, that's a pretty low probability way of finding something that really, really helps you achieve what you need to achieve. What I find is that the reason I'm saying it's so important to build up your intuition is because what you're not trying to do as a TA leader is become an expert in AI. What you're trying to do is where you are uniquely positioned is to sort of coalesce this. What roughly are these things capable of? Which you're not going to have a completely novel understanding of, but you just need to be at parity with like the world. But the thing that you're an expert on is, what are the things I need to achieve? What are the things my team needs to achieve? What are the things that are keeping my team up at night? What are the things that are slowing my team down? And it's only by having an understanding of what these tools can do for you that you can start to marry those two things and make smart decisions about, therefore, I'm going to focus attention on rethinking how we do this process, because now I think it can really substantially be impacted by AI. So obviously I have a complete dog in the race here. I think that the way interviews are happening and a lot of the drudgery around them really decreases the quality of the interview process. And so I hope as many people as possible in TA think, well, that's a part of my process I'm going to try and really rethink now that we have these capabilities in mind. But it's by no means the only one. So, my advice to TA leaders is build up that intuition. ChatGPT is a great way to do that. There are other vendors out there that offer free trials. Metaview is one of them, for example. Give it a go. And, it should be on us to sort of show you essentially how this can make a difference for you. So that's the sort of experimentation piece. I think the level of diligence around answers that these, or recommendations that these AI tools are providing, I think it's incumbent on the user of those tools, the customer, the buyer, to understand how those recommendations are arrived at. And so I think there's a whole bunch of like natural questions that you should pursue down that line of questioning. Not really germane to Metaview, so not something I've sort of thought a ton about, because we are much more in this automation and productivity buckets. The things that more matter in that world are, one thing that is true with a lot of these tools is you're exposing quite sensitive data to them, because a lot of these tools, they need, for them not to just be generic like ChatGPT is, you need to give it context. What does context mean? It means data that's sort of proprietary to your organization, so that it can give you, accelerate you in a way that sort of is personal, which is one of the great things about AI, is it accelerates me personally in a way that might be slightly different to someone else, because maybe I had a different type of conversation with a candidate or whatever it might be. So there's a whole host of sort of fairly now sort of well-worn questions and processes that even for these sort of like new flashy AI tools, you should still be sort of putting these folks through, whether that's their security posture, their GDPR compliance posture. These are all things that have always been the case and should be no different for AI vendors just because it's new. I don't think there's like this other than when it comes to trying to impact decisions, which I think is like a completely is a new world, and understanding that is it's going to be probably going to end up being its own. There'll be specific certifications and whatnot around that in future, I'm sure, but not something again we're focused on. I think for the rest of it, it's just as you would any other piece of software.
Fantastic, really, really helpful. And I think just to kind of sort of summarize it all up, and it's been such a sort of fascinating discussion about the way that AI will impact things and things for TA to consider. I loved your point about accountability. That's not going to go away. So we can automate things, but ultimately the human has to be accountable for the decision around that. I also loved your point around intuition as well. So how do we keep that into the process? Is that we'll always automate things, but actually that human element of the intuition, but also understanding the human element within the hiring process too. Then I really liked your advice around experimentation too, and that you can do that either through personally with ChatGPT, or actually go and look for tools that in an area of a point of pain that you can easily download and just have a look at how those work. And then the last thing, which I think is probably one of the most important, is that anything that you do around AI, you should always be asking the question of what proprietary data am I exposing myself to, and how well does whoever's proposing that AI understand that? Because if I'm accountable for it, then I want to make sure that whoever is giving me a tool to improve whatever it is has really robust understanding of how you protect that data, treat that data, and therefore don't expose me to any greater liability or worry than
I think it would be a mistake to stress that last point too much. We've all gone about adopting software for however long your career is. You've been using and adopting software as part of that, and you've always been exposing certain information, certain proprietary information to these tools. So that's not a new thing. It's just don't lower the bar because this is new in AI. You should just continue to care about those things too, but also don't all of a sudden treat it like it's like there's some higher bar that needs to be met. It's if you're going to build up that intuition around these tools, you need to experiment with them. You can do that in a sort of a little like baby steps way, or you can by just trialing things, or you can do that in a more sort of full-blooded. We're going to give this thing a go and sort of get everyone on board. It's always been the case. Yeah,
and I think that's a great point to sort of finish up on. Really, is that while there's a lot of hype around Gen AI and where we are now, the risks around it are no different from the risks that we've always been worried about, whether that be data protection for any piece of software, whether that be for bias, whether that be for transparency. And so that shouldn't be a reason for not experimenting just because it's got AI in front of it, because we've been experimenting with software for many years now, and the risks are much the same. So thank you very much for sharing it. Siadhal, it's been a great conversation, been really enjoyable talking to you. Thank you for your insights, and best of luck with the future for Metaview.ai.
Thank you so much. You're an awesome interviewer, which should count for something coming from me as the sort of the founder of an interview-focused company. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers.